Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WaterXchange. My name is Matt Lindberg, and I'm the Rockies Area Practice Lead for Water Resources at Brown & Caldwell, and I'll be your moderator today. If you're new to WaterXchanges, they're an opportunity to have a peer-to-peer discussion, share lessons learned, learn from each other about some of the most important water-related issues of the day. And today's topic is driving real progress toward collaborative solutions and a more secure water future. So a very broad topic, and we have a couple of really great speakers to talk about this today. Before we get going, we have a couple of housekeeping items. First, today's session is being recorded, so you can go back to it at a later time. You can share it with your interested colleagues and friends. And the second is that it's meant to be an exchange, not only among the folks on camera, but also with you, the audience. And so to that end, we have a chat box that you can add your comments, you can add your questions. We have folks monitoring that chat box, so they may be able to answer your questions before the end of the session. But if not, we'll have about 10 minutes dedicated at the end to field your questions and provide some answers. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Alan Packard, and Alan is the general manager of the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District in Utah, and he's joining us from Utah. Welcome, Alan. And then we also have Russ Sands. Russ is the chief of the water planning section, water supply planning section at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Thanks for being here today, Russ. I'm going to turn it over to Alan and Russ to provide a little more background on what they do and their organization. So, Alan, tell us a little more about the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, your role at the district, and then some of the customers you serve.
Sure, thank you. Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District provides drinking water supplies to a population of about 750,000 people, to suburban communities near Salt Lake City. We have about 150 employees, and we operate 3 treatment plants, a conventional large water treatment plant, the largest in Utah, 180 million gallons per day. And we also have a variety of water sources, including a reverse osmosis brackish groundwater treatment plant. And I've been with the organization, come up through the organization and through the engineering side of things, and loved working in this field.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Large organization with a lot of reach. That's great. Thank you. And Russ, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about the Colorado Water Conservation Board and your role and the folks that you serve.
Sure. So I work for the Colorado Water Conservation Board, or CWCB, and we are a fairly small organization. We're a policy organization that really don't have regulatory authority, but we do a lot of work, especially around funding. We have several sections that work on interstate and federal issues, stream and lake protection, watershed health, and then my section, we focus a lot on kind of specialty areas around agriculture, climate change, drought, water conservation, but also are responsible for managing the update to the Colorado Water Plan. Colorado Water Plan is really the state policy document for how we're going to manage our future water supplies and really looking out into the future, what those future needs might be, and how we're going to work together collaboratively to hopefully help solve some of the most critical challenges.
Great. So small organization, but a lot of responsibility. You're small but mighty, I think. So cool. Great. Well, thought maybe we dive just a little bit deeper into your backgrounds to get to know you a little bit better. And Alan, I have a 3-part question for you. What was your very first job? What did it teach you? And what's some of the best career advice you've gotten along the way?
Okay. Well, my very first job I took on when I think I was 12 years old. And one of my neighbors hired me to mow his lawn, take care of his yard for the summer. And after I agreed upon a price with Mr. Barton, my neighbor, started working, I realized that he's a lot more fussy than my dad was about how I took care of our yard. And so I learned how to satisfy a customer and make sure he was happy. Um, yeah, career advice. Um, when I was going to engineering school at Utah State University, I think I got really good advice from my academic advisor. After my freshman year, I took a break from engineering school for about 2 years doing things unrelated, really people oriented activities. When I returned to engineering school, started back in the math and the chemistry and so forth, I wondered, wow, I kind of like that people stuff. Am I going to like this science stuff? So I talked to my advisor, Elliot Rich, and he said, look, as an engineer, you can work with people as little or as much as you want. There's all sorts of opportunities. And I found in my career, it's really most rewarding when I'm working with people solving problems. So I'm grateful for that advice he gave me.
Yeah, that's really great. So learning about customer service and people skills from the get-go. That's a really great
Yes,
story. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, Russ, how about you? What was your first job? What did it teach you, and what's been some great career advice you've received?
Yeah, I have a little bit interesting or unique background in that I guess I come from a long line of public servants. And so my dad worked in government and was in the military when I was born, but then later got on with State Department. And so we lived in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic when I was in high school. My dad was working at the embassy down the street, and then I worked at the consulate as my first job. And actually worked with the investigation section who were exploring fraudulent marriages. So we would, the investigators would go out, kind of do interviews, make sure that these were legitimate marriage or not. And I would get the reports on the back end in Spanish and then have to translate those into English. So it was an interesting job, taught me a lot about communication and whether that's verbal or written, and communicating in different languages and the nuances in language and how to say things the right way. But yeah, it was super interesting experience that taught me a lot. I think later in life, one of my favorite quotes that I think I heard in terms of business or career advice was, "There's no limit to what you can accomplish if you take your ego out of it." I think in the world we live in, we get a lot of feedback, a lot of public feedback, and sometimes there's a tendency you want to take that personally. You worked on something so hard, and they're saying they don't like something or that something should be better, and really, it's not always that personal. So I think about that, and then maybe the flip side, and another quote that I've always liked from a mentor of mine is that consensus can move mountains. So if we're listening and we're working together towards a common goal, we can really do a lot of amazing things and kind of find the solutions that work best for the most people.
Yeah, that's excellent. So a really good sort of precursor to our topic today, collaboration. And so let's dig into our topic. And I found that one of the most important aspects to fostering great collaboration is really having solid foundational data. I mean, data is really important for identifying issues, developing solutions, tracking how we're moving towards those solutions. And so I was wondering if you guys could share some thoughts on the importance of foundational data. And maybe, Russ, I'll turn to you first. What's been your experience with the need for foundational data in fostering effective collaboration?
Sure, and maybe I'll give you two kind of flavors of this. But first off, I think having good data is critical. If you, when you don't have it, and people are poking holes and saying, "Well, that doesn't look right." The more you can get on the same page, really refine your data, and kind of drive it, whether that's for modeling purposes or, in our case, a lot of state numbers of, where we think there are gaps. That's critical to just how we operate and bringing people together, getting on the same page, and really to people trusting you. At the same time, at the state level, I think often we struggle with the granularity of the data that we can get to. There are a lot of tools out there that are looking maybe at like neighborhood scale, and often we're dealing at a much higher, 30,000 foot level. We don't have gauges on every stream. We don't have municipal water conservation data on every utility. We have some subset of those that we use, and sometimes we spread that out to kind of be reflective of different parts of the state. But those bigger metrics that we can get out of that I think a lot about, in the water plan, we kind of look at scenario planning. And we look at these different variant futures, and we're using data to guide that. At the end, it's really kind of coming up with bookends of, how bad it might get, or maybe on the better side, where we might have less impacts in the future, less future water need, and what shapes that. So I think having really granular data is critical, but at the same time, sometimes we just need some good data that points us in a direction that can help us frame up a conversation in a good way.
Yeah. That's good. And I think you might have mentioned evolving data too. I think about the calculations that the state of Colorado has used to characterize our current and future water needs and how that's evolved over time. I think it started back in 2004, and we relied on a particular methodology and set of numbers. As we've worked with folks and they've expressed their opinions about those numbers and provided their input, then the state has responded to that and changed analyses. And I think the tools that the state has are really better than ever.
Absolutely, yeah. We're always refining.
Yep. Alan, what are your thoughts on the need for foundational data? I thought it was interesting. Russ talked about establishing trust. But yeah, share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. One thought I have is a lot of folks, probably me included, have a tendency to fancy themselves of having great intuition. So we like to think that we can draw conclusions on very scant data. And of course, our true abilities with good intuition are a lot more weak than we think they are. So to have good foundational data is good, that everyone can look at objective, measurable information and come to an agreement on ways that information can be analyzed. Jordan Valley has an interesting experience. We had a few years ago, we participated in a energy conservation program with our local electric utility. And we've been in business for decades, and we have certain operational protocols, which pumps to run, which wells to run. And we thought we were, optimized. But as we looked into this data, which you can't argue with it, throughout the system, we found wonderful opportunities to save a lot of money, where our operators, by intuition or just habit, they like to use certain wells or certain pumps, certain ratios of surface water and groundwater. Going through this careful process that was really heavy data driven, we achieved really great savings, approaching $800,000 per year in electrical cost savings for our utility.
Wow, that's a great story, and I think it's just really interesting how everyone sort of seemed to know how the system ran, but then when you really sort of dug into it, you found some great opportunities for improvement.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and it seems too that a lot of times when we're doing water planning, we think we know how things work, and then we do some analyses. We have some data sets, and it's really a good starting point then for working with other folks to maybe make improvements and get their feedback on what those improvements can be. Which maybe that leads us to another question, and that's other aspects of fostering effective collaboration. Data is one component, but things like transparent processes, maybe having really good working relationships, those are also very important to fostering great collaboration. And Alan, I'll turn to you. I turn to Russ first for this first question. Alan, you for the next question. Besides good data, what are some other really key components to fostering collaboration?
I think that having the ability to be patient with multiple perspectives is important. And a lot of times it takes time. You're working with new people, stakeholders, to understand their objectives and to explain what you're after in a certain collaboration environment. If each party can decide what's essential for them and what's nice to have, over time you build some trust. And if another stakeholder watches you as you're willing to let them have a win in a certain situation, it does create that increased trust that can build towards progress.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and I like your perspective on investing the time that it takes. Effective collaboration doesn't happen overnight, and finding solutions doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it just takes that amount of time for folks to get comfortable in that collaborative process and build that trust. So appreciate that
Right.
perspective. Russ, how about you? Besides good data, what's important for good collaboration?
Yeah, well, I think Alan nailed it. And a couple of things I think that are important about what he said is, well, one, just on that connection to data is that it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. And so sometimes you want to have conversations to understand if they're seeing something in the data that you're not, but also you're using that kind of interaction as an opportunity to explain what you're seeing. And that sometimes is revealing and opens the conversation. I think the thing on this topic that Alan noted that I think is really important too is that willingness to, where can you give or where can you come together to compromise or find a win is so critical, and truly being open and honest and willing to do that. There are plenty of times in government where we're sharing information, and that's maybe more of a one-way street. Here's what happened. Here's what's happening. There are other times where we are really trying to openly get feedback, and there are some times where we're opening up a conversation so far to the extent that we really are asking for public input that is going to help shape or maybe even fully they're going to control the outcome of this decision. Being really clear about where we're at in that process is important, but I think either way, the root of that is just being open to listening and being willing to act on what you hear. I'm thinking about a story where we had some interns, we did some work, and we went out to some agricultural producers, and we sent the interns out, and they did this presentation. And it turns out that when you send a bunch of younger kids to some farmers who've been doing this their whole life, that interaction wasn't maybe as appreciated, right? So being open to the feedback you get of what they didn't like and how you could maybe serve that information up better, or listening to what their concerns are in the first place and taking that back and actually being able to do something with that, it's just so crucial. If you're taking the time to meet with people, then take the time to really internalize what you're hearing and see how you can act on it to shape things up in a better way so that your next interaction is better, or maybe you're carrying their idea or the thing they saw in the data forward to your next conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And you're really sort of engaging them to help you solve problems. I think that is a really great way to approach collaboration. And that sort of leads to another question and another, I think, component about effective collaboration, and that's really good communication. A lot of times, you're in a situation where you're trying to get effective collaboration, but you're working with a number of folks that maybe are wearing different hats. They're representing an organization, and that organization has a mission, and they're sort of representing that mission. But what you'd really like to do is hear what they really think. How can we really roll up our sleeves and work on this problem? So, Russ, I was wondering if you could share some thoughts or examples about how we can facilitate open communication.
Yeah, a great question. I think it's a commitment to not just checking the box to have the public meetings that you said you were going to have, but going the extra mile. When you're in a public setting, if there's reporters around or people think that's their only bite at the apple to get their comment out, they're going to approach that. They're going to come with their talking points. They're going to come maybe angry. You're going to get one flavor of what they're thinking, but usually those comments, they're not coming to the negotiating table with everything they're willing to give. They're coming with what they want. If they're angry, they're coming with that anger. They're not really coming with, what's behind that. And so you got to take the time to unpack that. And sometimes that's not always going to be just at the public meeting that you had. It's going to be, hey, can we talk about this offline too? Or can I circle back on this? Or can I take you to coffee? I think you have to have that personal connection and really open the door to a deeper dialogue, because then you can really kind of cut through stuff and have a better understanding. Because we have, obviously at a standpoint of the state that we can't, they're non-negotiables for us, maybe in some cases, and it doesn't do a lot of good if that's what everybody's bringing. It's just here's where my line in the sand is. You got to open up that place. Well, where can we work together?
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. And really striving to hear from everyone, whether that's in a follow-up conversation or maybe even in a group meeting situation where you're sort of reading the room and making sure that you're hearing from everybody that is present and hearing their opinions.
Yeah, it's an old facilitation tactic, but I think there's a lot of times we're in a meeting, and even in those settings, it's just so critical to pay attention to who's talking and who's not. You always have people that are, whether they're the squeaky wheel or the most knowledgeable person that are talking, and a lot of times they dominate that conversation. There's other people that maybe just don't feel comfortable speaking up, or they have a really good idea, but maybe they don't feel as sure of the subject matter. They don't want to say the wrong thing and sound stupid. Or you have other people that may be angry and they may have really legitimate concerns that are worth taking the time to hear. And you just have to kind of make that time to come up to them after, like, I didn't hear, or in the meeting, hey, I didn't hear from you. I've heard this, like, let's talk to this person or this group. Is there anybody else that wants to say something? And it's important to make that space.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'll turn to Alan. Alan, do you have some thoughts on facilitating effective communication and talking about water issues with your constituents?
Yeah, I love what Russ said about commitment to listening, and then kind of demonstrating that you're listening by following up and doing something different that the person you're working with wants to have done. And some other techniques that Jordan Valley had success with a few years ago, we implemented a drought contingency plan. And per Bureau of Reclamation standards, it's a public process. We seek a lot of feedback from the public. So our stakeholder group consisted of 17 of our member agencies, cities, improvement districts that purchase water from Jordan Valley, and various other stakeholder interests, federal and state regulators, agricultural interests, environmental interests. And so if we have this diverse group meeting together, we would often start off a meeting with kind of an icebreaker type question, so that you get to know each other on a personal level. And that can really be productive. Once you get to know someone personally, you're willing to work more with them and not just put them in a box of, categorize them in a certain way that you assume they have a certain perspective. So we appreciate the success of that approach in our development of our drought contingency plan. And one thing which we ended up doing is, as we made this plan, and it has different mitigation measures and different response measures according to severity of drought. And those responses would be a limitation on water, a more expensive water if you exceed that limit, and it directly affects our member agencies. So we wanted to give them some control over the consequences that would come to them. And so we authorized them to be on an advisory committee to vote. We gave them the foundational data. Here's the water supply information this year. Here's the snowpack. Here's the predicted runoff. Here's what it is, our reservoir conditions. And then let them vote as an advisory committee what level of drought they want to recommend that Jordan Valley's Board of Trustees should adopt. And I think that helped get buy-in from them. It was a successful approach.
Yeah. Excellent. So having them sort of help you solve the problem in some ways. Yeah. I like what you said too about just developing those personal relationships and having the icebreaker question. I'm sure there was something in there about their first job and what it taught them. Yeah. But, one thing that I've heard here in Colorado said about the Basin Roundtable process. So Russ, as you know, we've got 9 Basin Roundtables across the state, and they're made up of a variety of stakeholders, and they talk about water issues. They make recommendations to award grants to push forward important projects. So they have an important role in our state, but I've heard folks say that the relationships that folks have built across different water use sectors has been one of the most important and maybe in some ways unintended benefits of the roundtable process. So,
yeah, one of the brilliant things that some of our predecessors put in place, I think, just seeing that a lot of lobbying was happening, which that always happens, but just trying to infuse more of a grassroots informed local perspective into water policy. And so they set up the roundtables, as you noted, which are basically just stakeholder groups in each major river basin, and then there's an additional carve out for the Metro Denver area. But that's been critically helpful, and I've heard that, as you noted, Matt, in certain basins where just even within one basin, people saying like, well, I hated the people in the north part of that basin, but the roundtable process gave them a space to communicate. It also gives us a space to communicate. And what I like about what Alan said, Alan, do you give out your phone number a lot to folks?
Only if I have to.
See, I've taken the opposite approach. I do it all the time. I just and I've not really had bad success with that. What I've found is that a lot of times when we open up those communications and that somebody just know, I mean, I tell them if I can't answer, I'm not going to, but I try to be as responsive as I can and just open up those pathways so that when we're, they're hearing something that's given them pause. Gosh, it's just so much better to have that communication come right to you than for them to spin on it. It kind of becomes this negative thing that maybe isn't even accurate, and it kind of builds a life of its own. And it's very hard to interrupt when the snowball gets steam going down the mountain. And it's a lot better if you can say, if you're, we used to say this all the time, even with drought contingency plan stuff and state, if you're hearing something in the media or from somebody else on your roundtable or in other places that doesn't ring true for you or seems wrong or is upsetting to you, just call, call or email us, that it's just so much better to have them feel like they have that personal connection because that's when I think the good stuff happens and we can really move because maybe there is something that we need to pay attention to that we just inadvertently said incorrectly and we can course correct and them feeling like they have access, I think is really a heart of this. A lot of people really get upset when they don't feel like they have any control. We've talked about that and decision making. And so that piece of giving them some control, building trust is inherently opening of communication pathways.
Excellent. And that sort of reminds me too of what Alan had said earlier about, involving stakeholders in their drought contingency planning and using data to sort of explore some of those issues and really sort of taking the time to build that trust. And Alan, I might turn back to you. You had made mention of what sounded like some trade-offs that folks, once they had some data in front of them, once they were comfortable in that collaborative process from your investment in time, they were willing to have some good discussions about trade-offs. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this issue of trade-offs in your dealings on different projects.
Sure. A current issue in the Great Salt Lake Basin is the declining levels of Great Salt Lake. And the last few years of drought. Last year was an exception, but before that we had some severe drought, which really laid bare how desperate the conditions are in Great Salt Lake Basin, and the level of the lake hit an all-time low, and it really demonstrated that we're in a long-term overdraft situation. So the trade-off that we're faced with is, okay, if we have increasing demands with new customers coming on our system, but yet the environment needs more water, not less. The kind of trade-offs we have is if we go for the cheap, easy solution and ignore the environment, then in the future, we're likely to be faced with a lot bigger costs in dust mitigation, for example. There's all sorts of environmental consequences that can come with lots of different water projects that at first may not seem readily quantifiable, but it probably makes sense to put the effort and time into try and quantify that so that you can understand what the trade-offs are, and have the stakeholders understand the give and take that needs to happen.
Yeah, and sort of using data perhaps to maybe almost justify that sort of playing that longer term game. I think that's good.
Right.
And I'll just take a quick pause and remind folks, if you have questions or comments that you would like to see addressed in the last 10 minutes of our session, please feel free to add those to the chat. Did I cut you off there, Alan? I didn't mean to do that. Was there something you want?
Nope.
Okay,
Nope.
Great. Good. Okay. And then Russ, what's your experience been with trade-offs, and what wisdom do you have there?
Well, they're all around us.
Yeah.
And to your point on data, I think we see those connections. This is a good example, I think, of where data can maybe lead to incorrect assumptions. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the water plan is, the percentage of how water breaks out across the state. And so about 90% of the water use in Colorado comes from agriculture. Mm-hmm. And I think that instantly triggers, much to the chagrin of many farmers and ranchers, of we need to take that water. We need to take it, right? And people's, I hear this a lot on the Front Range from folks that maybe just got back from their local farmers market, and that's a value to them, but they're not connecting the dots of, if we're taking water out of agriculture, then we're going to have less agricultural production, which could impact you locally, and it's a part of our economy. And so a lot of these trade-offs, I think, really are inherently also the flip of that is that we are very connected. And so when we're making trade-offs, we might be making trade-offs that people aren't really willing to accept. I think a lot of it is, how do we balance things, right? I heard Alan talk a minute ago about listening and creating wins. And so a lot of what we do is trying to find those win-win-wins. And we're in the space of scenario planning. We think about, what are the smart decisions that we can make today that are going to help us under any future, right? So there are inherent trade-offs in a lot of the work that we're going to do, but I think we can maybe minimize those trade-offs when we kind of educate about where the solution sets might really align to minimize picking winners and losers. I think that's not what nobody wants to be on the losing side, right? Yeah. So I think we see this play out at very local levels where if you have to, if it's in your backyard and you're talking about building a reservoir and that's going to impact, the park that you love, that's going to be put underwater. Those are big decisions that play out at a really local scale. Those are huge trade-offs, and yet they're important. They're really important to bring a lot of people together and engage around. At the state level, I think a lot of ours are really trying to set up how can we have those conversations more holistically, better bring everybody to broaden the tent, so that we're getting the biggest voice and trying to make the best decisions for moving forward.
Yeah. So many of the themes we talked about earlier in the session today, relying on good data, really taking the time to listen, all of those things play so heavily into identifying what those trade-offs are and then how you can forge a solution that maybe doesn't make it as much of a trade-off as we thought going into that situation. Russ, you mentioned scenario planning and thinking about the future. And that leads to the next topic in effective collaboration, and that's understanding uncertainty. There are so many drivers that are going to affect our water resources in the future, and each one of those drivers have their own level of uncertainty and can take their own trajectory. And at the same time, so many of those are intertwined too,
Yeah.
and they're
Yep.
related to each other. So it's a pretty complex question and discussion, especially when we're thinking about what investments we need to make today, and so that we're not over-investing or under-investing. And you mentioned there are, a lot of things that we know we can do today, regardless of what the future holds. So just thought I'd open up the conversation and maybe turn to you, Russ, to talk a little bit about uncertainty and how your agencies and your processes have accounted for that.
Yeah, well, and one thing maybe is important to note that I bet is a big difference between Alan and I. But Alan, you're actively building projects, right? You're if you need to, you build a
Exactly.
pipeline or something, right? That's a big
Right.
difference. Like at the state, we or at least state of Colorado for CWCB, we don't build projects. We fund a lot of projects, but we really rely on stakeholders to do it. So I think I'd be curious what Alan says in a minute. But when you're looking at scenarios and you're kind of balancing risk, how that plays out at a project scale is maybe different than how we think of it at the state scale. And I think that's important to know because I don't want to oversell it, but inherently scenario planning is a way to kind of look at risk and uncertainty. Again, for those not familiar, scenarios are really variant stories of what the future might look like. If you had a crystal ball and you knew, that would be one thing, but we don't. We've seen big, like an economic downturn radically shift the trajectory for growth in the state, for example. So these big drivers, as you mentioned, things like climate change, population growth, how much are people going to conserve, are a way of trying to explore maybe some of these different outcomes if things trend one way or over another and pit those against each other to see if that tells you something, right? For example, in the state water plan, our hottest scenario where we have 4.2 degree warming Fahrenheit in the future and the most growth in the state is offset when you look at the next scenario beneath it where we also have the highest investment in water conservation. And so that tells you about the potential that water conservation can still make in terms of driving our future need down. So it tells you how important that investment is. So I think, risk and uncertainty are the things that we are constantly struggling with, and how to serve that up in a way that resonates with people and helps kind of tell a story about, again, using that data to really shape a story about here's what this is indicating to us. And so how that's kind of played out in the water plan is directly embodied in the water plan where we say, we need to double down on water conservation now more than ever. And we also need to make those linkages with land use planning and alternative water supplies, like whether it's reuse water or stormwater, rainwater, or any type of water we can use, and how we align policies to really move to a mutual goal. And those are examples, as you noted, where any path we go down, that's probably a good outcome for a future for us. All of those things create resilience for the state of Colorado. So yeah, that's absolutely. But I'm curious, Alan, it's probably slightly different when you're looking at a project.
Sure. Well, you touched on several things that we consider, and there's uncertainty with how much the population is going to grow, how much the current population is going to adopt conservation measures, climate change projections, and we develop future demand estimates on a variety of those and other factors, and we kind of create a best case or highest demand scenario and a lowest demand scenario, and then what we think is the most likely, upon which we'll base our capital plan. And early on the capital plan, we try and complete those projects that are needed no matter what scenario plays out. And then if we can postpone some of the projects until we approach a crossroads, in 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And then we say, okay, well, we're going to have to make a decision. We know more information at that time. And so that's been our approach to addressing uncertainty. I love what you said, Russ, about involving land use planning. Historically, water providers like Jordan Valley have been pretty much just responsive. If the cities they serve say we're growing at this rate, we need this much water, we hustle out and we go find it and we deliver it. But we're now in a situation where there is no more water to go find. So we have to work with the land use planners on the front end and say, well, here's how much water you've got. You're going to have to figure out how to live within that budget. And it's a complete shift in dynamics, and that kind of change makes people uncomfortable. But it needs to be done, and you just have to do uncomfortable things sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you said too about you have projects you know you're going to need to build. You have some other projects that maybe you keep in your back pocket and construct if the need arises. But to me, that really stresses the importance of having good data and tracking data on a regular interval so that you can really know when it is time to do those projects.
Mm-hmm. I like a lot what you said too. I'm just sitting here thinking about that, but the uncomfortable things, and this really gets to the power of messaging and just kind of realizing a better future it feels uncomfortable maybe while we're in that transition, but you're absolutely right. Whether we're talking about Colorado or the Colorado River Basin or just, even bigger scales, it really is about living within our means and, valuing water to the extent that we can make it stretch as far as it can and do the most good for the most people with every drop that we have. But I think about that a lot is that sometimes the inherent values that may not be always right are kind of caught up in that thought of how uncomfortable this might feel, right? So when we think about shifting our landscapes away from just these lush green lawns, that may feel uncomfortable, but xeriscape can be really beautiful too. So when you help people realize the opportunity, I think you also have a inflection point to maybe make those pain points not feel so painful.
Yeah. And that really highlights the importance of communication too, and really providing that vision for folks. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I don't know that we touched on was the importance of communicating data. We talk about future uncertainty and how complex it is to really understand that, and making sure that you communicate the results of analyses and data in a way that people are actually going to pick up and they're going to, take the time to read. People don't have a lot of time. And so it's really important to make sure that we're communicating in an effective and a concise way, especially with the public.
I like that. And I wonder what you think about this, Alan, but I think, this kind of goes back to that first question about data and the kind of two answers I gave you. Sometimes you really need a very hard number. And you need to make that as good as you can get it. Sometimes you don't need a number at all. When I think about things that resonate with people, if you say it's going to be 1 degree warmer or 4 degrees warmer, what does that mean? People don't really necessarily have a way to really identify with that. Depending on your background, that may seem more or less scary to you. But if you say, if we're 4 degrees warmer, Denver's going to look like the Phoenix, that's something that people can kind of understand. The same way I said, if you say, hey, well, we can take water out of ag, but that's going to impact your local farmers market. Sometimes we have to relate the numbers into tangibles that really get to what people experience in their daily lives.
Yeah, Alan, do you have any experience? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that communicating data effectively is a super valuable skill set. And I mean, you can throw people tables after tables of data and hope that someone's going to sift through it. You can spend some time to organize the data into visually appealing, and as Russ said, translate it into, okay, what does this really mean? What is it? How does that affect me as a consumer? And if you can express your point in a way that people understand the consequence of one choice or another, that's a very valuable skill set that that's important to include as you're working with data.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Well, we've talked about a number of different topics here, and I was wondering, we have a couple of minutes here, and then we need to move to questions and answers. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to just roll all this up, tie this together. What do you think some of the most important things are to driving, progress towards collaborative solutions? And maybe, Alan, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm lucky to have benefited from folks in the water industry in Utah decades ago or 100 years ago that had terrific foresight, made investments, sacrificed for future generations. And it's now up to me and my peers to do the same thing going forward. We have a lot of trade-offs. We have to educate our stakeholders of the consequences of various scenarios. And if we can use that foundational data, which may require, some sacrifice on the current users, but it's going to benefit everyone in the long term and result in a more prosperous community. I think that's kind of what I wanted to sum up.
Yeah, great. And Russ, what are your thoughts on some summary thoughts or summary principles here?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things I'm thinking about is, one, just maybe the word I didn't say is connectivity. I think connecting people to each other. We just kind of live in times where, wherever we get our information, it seems we're being told how different we are or how divided we are. But I think reality is we're pretty connected, and we all inherently value a lot of the same things. We all want healthy waterways. We all want to go, Colorado, we want to go to our watersheds and hike. We want to go rafting. We want to ski. We also want local food, and we want, to have vibrant cities. Like, all these things are connected, and we don't live in one world or the other. So again, connecting people so that they can realize those win-win-wins seems really important to me. The other thing that I am thinking a lot about too is, whenever we can flip the narrative not to what we're going to lose, but what we could gain, I think that's really important. It's easy, and I think, scare tactics of sometimes scare people off and just really get them to tune out. So it's not really about, things are going to, I remember this question when we put out the water plan. So a reporter asked me, well, you're saying all these things like there's these dire outcomes, but yet you're saying there's hope. How can you say that? I'm like, well, I have kids. I'm not giving up on anything. I don't think any of us are. I think we're here to fight the good fight, to realize our best future. And what can we gain by working together when we connect the communities who haven't inherently, historically been talked to, and that we're engaging them, and we're working to bring farmers together with the environmental community and the municipalities. I think we just have nothing but to gain from seeing each other's perspectives and really presenting that as a positive outcome, not just, hey, what we're going to lose and you got to pay attention. It really, Brad Udall, who's kind of climate scientist in Colorado and has national acclaim, always says, like, you can't depress people into action. Really framing up how we're going to motivate people by saying, like, this is hard. These are hard solutions. These are all the Gordian knots we have to, untangle. But if we can do it, what could we realize? What could our future be?
Yeah. I really like the way that you put that. And it really, our question earlier was about trade-offs, and that maybe has a little bit of a negative connotation. But if we can focus on what we can all gain, and, I heard Alan, earlier you talked about identifying wins for folks around the table. And so I think that's a really good way to view effective collaboration. So I'm going to change the topic here a little bit to questions and answers. So we have one from the audience, and it says, along the theme of driving collaboration, when you think about expanding the tent, who do you think is currently missing Or alternatively, where do you think is the greatest opportunity to increase community engagement? So, who's missing? What's the greatest opportunity to increase community engagement? And Alan, maybe I'll go to you first with this question.
Okay. Well, as far as increasing community engagement, when I think about Jordan Valley's conservation programs and efforts to have people fundamentally change the way they use water, we have some early adopters, and we've provided incentives in hopes that that will expand. But to increase it, to really scale up and have more widespread adoption, it's going to take probably some local ambassadors in neighborhoods who are the early adopters, and try and get a kind of a groundswell of expanding that enthusiasm to say, hey, I'm going to be part of the solution. I want my kids and grandkids to be able to live here nearby. I want to have them have an excellent quality of life, not have to worry about dust storms off Great Salt Lake. So maybe marshaling a bunch of local ambassadors is a way to drive more community broad engagement.
Yeah, yeah, real grassroots efforts. I think that's a great answer. Yeah. Russ, who do you feel like needs to be brought into the tent, and how can we work with those folks?
There's been so much great work in Colorado over the years that I don't want to make it all sound like it's this shift now, but I am really proud at the state scale. It seems like we really more wholeheartedly embrace some of our tribal partners. For the first time on our board, we have Lorelei Cloud, Director Cloud, is from the Southern Ute tribe, and she's on our board. We have Ernest House Jr., who's from the Ute Mountain Ute, and he's now on the Interbasin Compact Committee. I mean, really engaging our tribal partners, and just that we heard a lot about it in the water plan, just that indigenous knowledge across the state, whether it's from our tribal partners or our Seki communities down in the Rio Grande. That's been a really encouraging way that I think that we're broadening the tent, maybe culturally. Mm-hmm. But inherently, it's just, I think, a doubling down on the groups that we have and really expanding those. The roundtables provide us a good foundation for getting to a local perspective, but they're still only so well attended. We have to work really hard to get more perspective. And when I think about that, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, especially in the context of the state or the water plan, because I think the last thing that I want to do is get a bunch of people excited about something and then not really be able to deliver on that. And so what are the pathways for them realizing the better future that they want to see and having a real impact and feeling like their voice was heard? At the state level, maybe this is different than when Alan, if he has a project, that may be a more direct through line. But for us, we're such a local control state. I think a lot of it is about providing education, providing pathways to get involved with roundtables, helping encourage people to talk to their local municipality or their local government, because they're very big decisions that are happening very often at hyper local scales that the state may have nothing to do with. So part of, I think, the legacy and what I'm proud of the water plan is really trying to use that as a little bit of a template that you could graph over a local process that really sets the tone for bringing together a holistic set of voices, because we're not always going to be there or even touching a topic to bring people together, but I think we're trying to lay a little bit of a template that kind of says this is the new normal. Like everybody has a seat at the table, and you need to work harder to make sure that they're there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting couple of perspectives, Russ, with your agency with a statewide role, kind of looking very generally at the types of folks that need to be engaged. And then Alan, you guys build projects. And so, you're really looking for that grassroots support for things that are going to, help give you more water resiliency. So great perspectives.
Exactly.
Let me scan the wires here really quickly. There was another one that came across. As a geology student approaching graduation, this discussion makes me hopeful and excited to see people making some positive changes in the world. So, well done. I would love to know how Russ and Alan negotiate problems when disagreement arises in their teams. And maybe, Alan, I'll turn to you first.
Sure. One example I can think of pretty strong disagreement that Jordan Valley had years ago. We, as part of our future water supply, started buying up shares of irrigation water in a certain irrigation company. And the company viewed that with a lot of skepticism. They were distrustful of what Jordan Valley was up to. They actually sent out a letter to all their shareholders, said, do not sell your water shares to Jordan Valley. They're bandits. They're up to mischief. Don't deal with them. And so against that backdrop, we were successful in buying a few shares, got ourselves on the board of the company, and developed a relationship of trust that took many years, and it's actually came full circle after that many years. And the company approached me when I was serving on their board and said, "Say, would Jordan Valley consider taking over and running our irrigation company?" So sometimes it takes a lot of time, and to create that window of time, you've got to really think ahead. And think 20 years, 30 years into the future. It's a luxury to have time, but sometimes you have to make that luxury by thinking ahead.
Yeah. And that's been a sort of a continuing theme, making that investment in time. These sorts of things don't happen overnight, but it sure sounds like you were able to resolve some of these issues by direct engagement and communicating and hearing,
Right.
What others have to say.
Right.
Great. Russ, any thoughts on resolving disputes when you're trying to affect collaboration?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, great question, and thank you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you're a part of the solution. Stay hopeful. I'm really happy to hopefully be bringing some more hope to the world. But I think that the truth is, when you have disagreements, and I don't know if that's in the team dynamic internally or externally, but I think either way, it's really just built one conversation at a time. That's the process of building trust. You have to kind of unpack it, and I think once you hear it, you're doing one of two things. I think either you're dispelling something that they were angry about, and you're getting to the root of, hey, that's not actually what's happening here. And maybe sometimes I've had that just be over language. Well, it sounds like it, like we get that. Well, we won't use that term. I get why that is, maybe off-putting. Let's change how we're talking about it, but you're heard, right? In other cases, I think, we may not have a direct role in maybe seeing their outcome. I'm thinking about when the West Slope was really just getting beat up with drought this last year in the Yampa Valley. I remember going to a meeting and somebody said, well, what assurances do we have that you're taking this message, to the Front Range? And I was like, every assurance, and what I've tried to do to really bear that out is to take those messages and echo them. And I say, hey, I was out on the West Slope and this person said this and that person is saying this, and just to give voice to the concern that's out there in hopes that if we don't have an immediate solution, we're at least doing justice to the voices that are out there that often may feel disempowered and really just want to have a greater say and feel heard.
Excellent. I like you're sort of touching, Russ, on that theme of hope. And I'm afraid we have to close up the session. But that was a really nice note to end on. I really appreciate that. We do have lots of issues to overcome, and we need to do it in a collaborative way. And we've heard a lot of really great stories today and experiences about how to build that collaboration. And we're all in this together. So it's very important to forge that trust. Just a real quick reminder to everybody that was on. Today's session was recorded, so you can go back to it. You can forward it to other folks. I'd like to say a heartfelt word of thanks to Russ and Alan. I've learned a lot through this experience. You guys have shared a lot of really great stories and a lot of wisdom with us. And you've also taken some time and really appreciate that. I know your time is precious. And I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today and for adding comments and for asking questions. I thought that added some nice spice, and that one in particular added a really great note to end on. And so with that, I think we will end today's Water Exchange. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.